The storm came like a beast, roaring across the cliffs and tearing through the ancient forest. Rain fell in sheets, cold and relentless, soaking everything it touched. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the jagged trees and the blackened earth below. Amid the chaos, a lone figure stumbled through the mud, his clothes soaked, his hair plastered to his face. This was Kale, an Omega rejected by his pack for being weak, for being different, for being him. He had always known he was not like the others. While the alphas and betas of his pack moved with strength and confidence, Kale had always felt small, unnoticed, easily overlooked. His attempts to prove himself had been met with harsh words, ridicule, and finally exile. And now, cast into the storm, he wondered if he would ever be more than a shadow on the edge of the pack's world. Kale's breath came in ragged gasps, the cold biting into his bones. He could hear the distant howls of wolves, sharp and commanding, but tonight they were different. Among the cries of the storm, one howl rang out clearer, purer, almost melodic. It was a silver note against the chaos, echoing through the forest with power and authority. Despite his fear, Kale felt a strange pull, a deep, aching curiosity. Something about that sound spoke to him, not just as a wolf, but as something greater, almost human in its emotion. Without thinking, Kale followed the howl. Each step was a struggle through the slippery mud, each gust of wind threatening to knock him off his feet. Yet he pressed on, driven by a mixture of desperation and longing. He did not know where he was going, only that he could not stop. The howl called to him, and he, an exile with nowhere to belong, answered. The forest grew denser as he moved deeper, the trees bending and groaning under the storm. Strange shapes appeared in the mist, gnarled roots, blackened rocks, shadows that seemed almost alive. Kyle's heart pounded, and he realized how alone he truly was. The pack he had once called family had turned their backs on him. The warmth of acceptance, the comfort of familiarity had been stripped away, leaving only fear and the bitter taste of rejection. But still he pressed on. The silver howl cut through the storm again, closer this time, almost as if it were guiding him. The forest seemed to recognize him, parting in ways it had never before. Lightning flashed again, and Kale stumbled into a clearing bathed in silver light. And there, standing in the center, was the wolf. It was enormous, larger than any wolf Kale had ever seen. Its fur shimmered like moonlight on snow, and its eyes were a pale, piercing silver that seemed to see through him. Kale froze, fear and awe battling within him. The wolf's gaze was not just of an animal. It was intelligent, commanding, and strangely familiar. Then, as if sensing his hesitation, the wolf shifted. Its form blurred, and where once had stood a massive beast, now stood a man. Rylan, the Alpha King, revealed himself in the mist. His presence was commanding, regal, and terrifying all at once. Silver hair fell across his shoulders, eyes the same piercing shade as the wolf, and his posture radiated strength and authority. Even through the storm, Kale felt the pull of his presence, magnetic and impossible to resist. "You are far from home, Omega," Rylan said, his voice low, smooth, and filled with quiet power. "Why do you wander into the storm?" Kale swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. I don't belong," he admitted. "My pack. They cast me out." Rylan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in study. "Cast out," he repeated, his voice almost thoughtful. "And yet you survive. You followed my howl. That is bravery or foolishness? Perhaps both." Kale shivered, not just from the cold. There was something about the way Rylan looked at him, as if he could see every weakness, every fear, every secret hope. And yet instead of ridicule, there was curiosity, recognition. "I don't know why I followed you," Kale whispered. I heard you and I had to see where it came from." Rylan tilted his head, studying the boy before him. The storm howled around them, but in that clearing there was a strange calm. "Then you have courage you do not know you possess," he said finally. "Few would walk into the storm without knowing if they would survive. Few would answer the call of the silver wolf." Kale's heart beat faster. There was something hypnotic about Rylan, something that drew him in even as his mind screamed to flee. He had been taught to fear alphas, to know his place in the world as small, weak, unworthy. And yet, standing before this man, he felt something else. A spark, a hope, a possibility. Rylan stepped closer, and Kale instinctively took a step back, slipping slightly in the mud. The Alpha King's presence filled the clearing, powerful and overwhelming, yet not unkind. "You are an exile," Rylan said. "But even exiles have value. Even the weak can change fate. Kale looked up at him, unsure whether to believe the words or fear them. I don't know how, he said quietly. I've always been less than, always rejected, always alone. The Alpha's gaze softened slightly, a faint trace of something almost like pity, though it was mixed with interest, challenge, and something deeper Kale could not name. Alone is a choice, Omega, Rylan said. And sometimes being alone is what allows you to find the strength no pack could ever give you. You will either follow or you will fall. Choose. The words hit Kale like thunder. For a moment he felt the weight of all his failures, the sting of all the rejection he had endured. And yet beneath it all a flicker of something new began to glow, a tiny, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find his place even if it was not where he thought it would be. He nodded, barely able to speak. I will follow. Ryland's lips curved into a faint smile, and with a graceful step he moved into the mist. Kale hesitated, then followed. Each step was uncertain, each breath a struggle, yet he pressed on, driven by something he could not name. The storm raged, the wind howled, and lightning continued to split the sky. Yet for the first time, Kale did not feel entirely lost. He felt watched, guided, and strangely protected. He could not yet understand the bond forming between him and the silver wolf who was more than a wolf, but he felt it in the pull of his heart, in the ache of his chest, and in the trembling of his hands. Something was coming. Something that would change everything he thought he knew about himself, about strength, and about the world. As the clearing disappeared behind him, swallowed by the mist and rain, Kale looked up at the looming trees, their branches bent and twisted by the storm. The howl returned, closer, sharper, resonating deep in his chest. He quickened his pace, unsure what awaited him, yet unable to turn back. And in that moment, Kale realized he was no longer just an exile. He was following a power greater than he had ever imagined, a power that might save him or destroy him. The silver wolf's howl cut through the storm once more, a haunting, beautiful note that carried both warning and promise. And Kale, shivering, exhausted and terrified, ran toward it, unaware that the creature guiding him through the tempest was no ordinary wolf, and that the man who would shape his destiny was watching every step. In the darkness, in the storm, in the wild heart of the forest, Kale's journey began. End of Part 1. Hook. Kale stumbled into another clearing, heart pounding, and froze. The silver wolf was waiting, but it shifted again into the form of a man. Ryland's eyes glowed like moonlight on steel, and his voice cut through the storm. You have followed me this far, Omega, but are you ready to step into the world you do not yet understand? Kale swallowed hard. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the answer mattered more than his life itself. The storm had passed, leaving the forest dripping and silent except for the distant rumble of thunder. Mist clung to the ground, curling around gnarled roots and moss-covered stones. Kyle followed Ryland cautiously, each step heavier than the last. His body ached from the storm, but it was nothing compared to the tension in his chest. He did not know what awaited him, yet some part of him felt a flicker of hope, a spark he had not felt since his exile. Ryland moved with the grace of a predator, silent and sure, yet every so often he glanced back as if testing Kale's resolve. Keep your pace steady, he said, his voice calm but commanding. Do not stumble. The path ahead is not meant for the faint of heart. Kale swallowed, nodding, though his legs shook. He had spent so long feeling weak, rejected, invisible, that simply following this man, this Alpha King, felt like stepping into a new world he had never been allowed to see. The trees began to thin, and Kale's eyes widened as he saw the valley ahead. It was unlike anything he had imagined. A fortress rose from the mist, its towers entwined with silver vines that shimmered faintly in the pale light. Waterfalls cascaded down the cliffsides, feeding crystal streams that twisted like snakes through the forest. Wolves moved along the edges of the clearing, their eyes glinting, silent guardians of a place both beautiful and dangerous. This is your domain? Kyle whispered, awestruck. Ryland's gaze swept over the valley, sharp and commanding. Mine, he said simply. Few outsiders ever find their way here. Fewer survive the journey. Kyle shivered, not just from the cold. The power in the air was palpable, like the land itself bowed to the Alpha King's presence. And yet, for all its majesty, There was something lonely about the fortress. The towers rose like silver spears into the sky, but no laughter or warmth echoed from within. It was a place of power, yes, but also of solitude. As they approached the gates, Cale noticed movement, figures in silver and black armor, standing like statues along the walls. Their eyes followed him with curiosity and caution. Wolves prowled between the guards, silent, watchful, loyal to a degree Cale had never known. He felt the weight of their gazes, the scrutiny of beings who were not used to outsiders. "You will enter," Ryland said, his voice a low rumble, "and you will be observed. Do not falter. Do not show fear that cannot be controlled. This is not a place for weakness." Kyle nodded again, swallowing hard. His heart hammered, but he forced himself to keep his head high. Even if his pack had rejected him, even if he had been cast out into the storm, he would not falter here. Not in front of the Alpha King. The gates opened silently, and Cale followed Rylan into the fortress. Inside, the air was warmer, but it hummed with energy, strange and electric. Silver banners swayed from the ceiling, etched with ancient runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Statues of wolves and men intertwined in eternal vigilance lined the halls. Every step echoed against the marble floors, announcing Cale's presence to the unseen eyes of the court. "You will wait here," Rylan said, stopping before a grand chamber. "I will decide when you may enter." Cale's pulse quickened. He had expected to be dismissed, mocked, or sent away. Yet here he was, standing in a hall that seemed alive with the presence of power, and the Alpha King had given him pause. Hours passed, or was it days? Time seemed to bend in the fortress. Cale wandered the halls cautiously, exploring the corridors and alcoves. He saw wolves resting in quiet corners, humans practicing swordplay with supernatural grace, and glimpses of magic that shimmered in the air like dust in sunlight. Every sight reminded him of his own weakness, yet he felt a strange longing, a desire not just to survive but to belong. Finally, the doors of the grand chamber opened, and Rylan appeared, as commanding as ever. "You will dine with me," he said, and Cale followed, his heart pounding in a mixture of fear and anticipation. The chamber was vast, lined with windows that looked out over the valley. Candles flickered along the walls, casting shadows that danced like living creatures. The table was long, set with silver and crystal, yet only 2 seats were filled. Rylan at the head, and Cale opposite him. "You have followed," Rylan said, breaking the silence. "You have survived the storm. You have not faltered. That is unusual for one of your kind." Kyle lowered his gaze, unsure if he was meant to respond. I had no choice," he admitted. "The howl. I had to follow it. I did not know why, but I could not stop myself." Ryland studied him, eyes piercing, unreadable. "The howl calls not only to the lost, but to the deserving. You have something within you, Omega, though you do not know it. I will find out what it is." The words both terrified and intrigued Cale. He had never been praised, never been told he had value. And yet here, in the presence of the Alpha King, he felt a spark of possibility, an ember of hope that maybe he was more than what his old pack had made him believe. After the meal, Rylan led Cale through the fortress, showing him the gardens where silver flowers glowed beneath the moonlight, the training yards where warriors and wolves moved in perfect harmony, and the chambers where ancient relics hummed with power. With every step, Cale felt both awe and fear, a mixture of attraction and intimidation he could not name. "You see," Rylan said, pausing on a balcony that overlooked the valley. "Power is not always in strength. It is in control, in courage, and in knowing one's own limits. You may have been rejected, Cale, but perhaps that rejection has prepared you for what is to come." Cale nodded, feeling the weight of his past in his chest. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the words seemed too small, too insignificant in the presence of a man like Rylan. And yet, a pull in his chest told him he could not remain silent. I want to understand. I want to learn. I want to belong." Rylan's gaze softened slightly, And for the first time, Cale saw a hint of emotion in the Alpha King's eyes. Not the commanding presence, not the predator's calculation, but something almost human. "Then you will remain," he said. "And you will be tested. You will be observed. The path ahead is not easy, but it is the only way." Cale felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. To stay in this place was to risk everything, his life, his heart, his very identity. But to leave now would mean returning to the shadows, to the storm, to loneliness. He made his choice silently. He would stay. He would endure. He would follow. Days passed, and Cale began to learn the rhythms of the fortress. He observed the wolves and humans learning their ways, noticing the subtle power dynamics that governed every action. He saw how the Alpha King moved among his people, commanding yet fair, fearsome yet protective. And slowly Cale began to understand that this world was not meant for weakness, but for those who could rise despite it. One evening, under a blood-red moon, Cale wandered the outer gardens. The air was thick with mist and shadows twisted unnaturally among the silver-leaved trees. He heard the distant howl of the silver wolf, and a chill ran down his spine. It was close this time, almost as if it were calling him, not just through the night, but through something deeper, something primal. Cale stepped forward, heart racing. The howl echoed again, clearer, stronger. He realized with a shiver that this was not just a sound. It was a summons, and he, the rejected Omega, had answered. A flash of movement caught his eye. In the mist, he glimpsed Ryland's figure, watching silently, a shadow among the silver trees. Cale froze, unsure if he should approach. The Alpha King's eyes, even in shadow, seemed to pierce through him, reading every thought, every fear, every hope. "Cale," Ryland said, his voice soft but commanding. "Do you understand what it means to follow the silver wolf?" Cale swallowed hard. I think I do," he whispered. "It means trust and courage. And maybe finding who I am." Ryland's gaze softened, and he stepped forward. "Perhaps," he said, "you are more than you know. Perhaps your exile was not the end, but the beginning. You will need that courage, Omega. The path ahead is not safe, and the darkness you face will test every part of you." Cale's heart pounded in his chest. He did not yet know the trials that awaited him, the dangers, the enemies, or the truths he would uncover. But one thing was certain. He was no longer alone. The silver wolf, the Alpha King, was watching, guiding, and, though Cale did not fully understand it yet, changing him in ways he could not yet name. The night deepened. The mist curled like living tendrils, and the howl echoed once more, silver and haunting. Cale stood at the edge of the garden, shivering, exhausted, and terrified, but for the first time he also felt alive. And somewhere, deep within him, a spark of something new began to burn. The morning mist clung to the forest like a living blanket, curling around the silvered trees and dripping from leaves like liquid glass. Cale followed Ryland through the winding paths of the cursed forest, a place whispered about in legends but rarely seen. Even in the daylight, the forest seemed alive, its shadows twisting unnaturally, and the air thrummed with an invisible power. "You must be careful," Ryland said, his voice low and steady. His presence beside Cale was both reassuring and unnerving. "The forest tests those who enter. Not all who wander here return." Cale swallowed, gripping the straps of his pack. I understand," he said, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. This forest was unlike anything he had known. It was not just trees and mud, it was alive, aware, and somehow aware of him. The air seemed to press against his chest, the shadows stretching to meet him, daring him to falter. Ryland moved ahead, a silver shadow blending with the mist, and Cale followed. With each step he felt the weight of his exile, the sting of his pack's rejection, but also a strange determination. He had survived storms, wolves, and ridicule. He could survive this too. He had to. The forest thickened, and soon the ground became uneven, roots twisting like serpents across the path. Strange sounds echoed. Low growls, rustling leaves, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Kale's pulse quickened. "Rylan, what is this place?" "This forest is old," Rylan replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Older than kingdoms, older than men. It holds power, yes, but also danger. Spirits linger here. Lost wolves, exiles, and curses that prey on weakness. You must walk carefully, Kale. One misstep, and the forest will not forgive." Kale nodded, though fear tightened his chest. He had never faced anything like this, yet a strange part of him, an ember long buried, stirred. Perhaps he was not as weak as he had been told. Perhaps there was strength inside him waiting for this moment to ignite. Hours passed. Kyle stumbled through twisted roots and slippery moss, his muscles aching, his lungs burning. Yet whenever he faltered, Rylan's presence was there, a guiding shadow, a silent strength. At times, Kale could feel the Alpha King's eyes on him, even when he could not see him, and it both comforted and unnerved him. "Why are you following me?" Kale finally asked during a brief pause beside a silver stream. The water shimmered unnaturally, reflecting the twisted branches above. "You don't owe me anything." Rylan's gaze met his, piercing and unreadable. "I do not need a reason," he said slowly. "I have observed you, Omega. You are different. Stronger than you know, though you hide it behind fear and doubt. I want to see what you are capable of." Kale swallowed, unsure how to respond. Praise had always been foreign to him, encouragement even more so, and yet hearing it from Rylan stirred something unexpected, pride, hope, and a warmth he could not name. The journey grew more perilous. Shadows coalesced into forms that moved with unnatural speed, eyes glowing faintly red. Wolves, no, not ordinary wolves, emerged, their fur black as night, their teeth sharp and unnatural. Kale froze, but Rylan stepped forward, his presence like a silver shield. "Stay behind me," Rylan instructed. His voice was calm, commanding, and terrifying. "Do not interfere unless necessary." Kale's hands trembled, but he obeyed. The dark wolves lunged, moving like smoke, and Rylan shifted seamlessly, his movements fluid and predatory. Within moments, the wolves were driven back, snarling and retreating into the mist. Kale watched, awestruck. The Alpha King was more than legend. He was a force of nature, a being who commanded respect, fear, and fascination all at once. When the last shadow vanished, Rylan turned to Kale. "You are alive because you followed the path," he said. "Many would have panicked. Many would have fallen. You did not. That is a beginning." Kale felt his chest swell with a mixture of relief and pride. For the first time, someone had seen him, not as weak, not as rejected, but as capable. And it terrified him. He did not know if he could live up to it, but a spark within him refused to be snuffed out. As night fell, they made camp in a clearing where the moonlight struck the forest floor like silver fire. Kale built a small fire while Rylan observed silently, his presence a constant quiet weight beside him. The Alpha King did not offer words of comfort, but Kale felt the unspoken understanding. He was not alone. "You have survived much," Rylan said finally, breaking the silence. "And yet the true test is only beginning. The forest will challenge not only your body, but your mind and your heart. There are things here that prey on doubt, fear, and regret. You must face them, and you must endure." Kyle nodded, staring into the flames. He had endured rejection, storms, and exile. He could endure this, couldn't he? The night grew colder, and Kyle wrapped his cloak tightly around himself. Yet even in the chill, he felt the warmth of Rylan's presence nearby. It was strange, confusing, and magnetic. The Alpha King's strength seemed to seep into him, not as domination, but as guidance, a promise that he would not face the darkness alone. Sleep did not come easily. The forest hummed with unnatural energy, and Kale's dreams were filled with shadows, twisting, whispering, challenging him. He saw visions of his past failures, heard the voices of those who had mocked him, and felt the sting of rejection all over again. Yet woven through the fear, there was another presence, a silver glow, a warmth, a strength that seemed to watch over him. Morning arrived with mist curling around the trees and sunlight piercing through the dense canopy. Kale awoke to find Rylan already standing, scanning the forest. "Time to move," the Alpha King said. "The artifact awaits." "You will need all your courage and wits." Kale rose, determined despite the weariness in his bones. The forest had already tested him, and he had survived. The thought gave him strength, though it was fragile, like a candle flickering against the wind. Their journey continued deeper into the cursed forest, where the trees grew twisted and the shadows thickened. Strange symbols carved into stone glowed faintly in the undergrowth, and Cale realized the forest itself was alive with magic, watching, testing and guiding them. At one point, Cale slipped on a slick rock and nearly fell into a chasm. Ryland's hand shot out, catching him effortlessly. "Control yourself," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Strength without control is nothing. Fear can be turned into power, but only if you do not succumb to it." Kyle's heart raced. The touch of Ryland's hand was brief, yet it sent a warmth through him he did not understand. It was not comfort, not kindness, not tenderness, but something different. Something that hinted at trust, connection, and possibility. They pressed on, facing illusions, phantom wolves, and the haunting whispers of past exiles. Each challenge pushed Cale to his limits, forcing him to confront fear, doubt, and the shadows of his past. And with each trial, Ryland observed silently, guiding without interfering, allowing Cale to grow in strength and confidence. By the time they reached a silver lake hidden deep within the forest, Cale was exhausted but changed. He had faced the darkness and survived, not because Ryland had saved him, but because he had found a strength within himself he had never known existed. Ryland stepped beside him, eyes reflecting the moonlight on the water. "You have done well, Omega," he said. "Few would have reached this point. Few would have endured what you have endured. The bond between us? It is not yet complete, but it begins here. You are no longer just a follower. You are part of something greater. But know this, the forest, the magic, and the enemies beyond, they will not wait. You will be tested again, and next time failure may not be forgiven." Cale looked into Ryland's eyes, a mixture of fear and longing stirring deep within him. The Alpha King's presence was overwhelming, magnetic, and inescapable. He realized, with both excitement and trepidation, that the bond forming between them was more than survival. It was connection, trust, and something that could grow into something far deeper. The silver wolf howled from the far end of the lake, and Cale shivered. This time, the sound was not just a call, but a promise of trials, of danger, and of the unspoken bond that was beginning to take root between him and the Alpha King. Cale turned to Ryland. I will face whatever comes," he said quietly. "I will endure. I will not falter." Ryland's eyes softened for a moment, a rare glimpse of approval passing through them. "Good," he said. "Because the darkness is coming, and you will need all your courage. And perhaps your heart as well." Cale shivered again, though not from the cold. Somewhere deep inside he knew the truth. His journey was only beginning, and the bond between him and Ryland would be forged in shadows, trials, and something far more powerful than fear. The moon reflected on the silver lake, and the wolf howled again, silver and haunting. Cale felt the pull of it in his chest, a promise of what was to come. And though he did not yet know the full danger, he knew one thing. He would follow, endure, and face whatever lay ahead, for the Alpha King, and for the bond that had begun in the storm. The wind howled across the cliffs like a living thing, carrying with it a sense of dread. Cale stood at the edge of the fortress walls, the moon casting silver light over the valley below. He could see movement in the distance, shapes, shadows, forces gathering that he could not yet name. The forest had tested him, but now a new threat approached, one that would test both his body and his courage in ways he had never imagined. Ryland stood beside him, a silver shadow against the moonlight. His eyes glimmered with an intensity that made Cale's chest tighten. "They come," Ryland said, voice low and commanding. "The ones who wish to claim my domain, to destroy all we protect. Tonight the fortress will be tested, and you will be tested as well." Kyle swallowed, feeling fear curling in his stomach. He had survived storms, cursed forests, and dark illusions, but this was different. This was real danger, and it was coming not from the shadows, but from beings who wanted to break everything Ryland had built. I don't know if I'm ready," Cale admitted, voice trembling despite his resolve. Ryland turned to him, eyes piercing. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Omega," he said. "It is action in spite of it. You have faced fear before and you have survived. You will do so again. But you must trust yourself." "And trust me," Cale nodded, trying to steady his shaking hands. Trust had always been a fragile thing for him. His pack had betrayed him, leaving scars deeper than any wound. And yet, standing beside Ryland, he felt a strange warmth, a presence that promised guidance, protection, and something more he could not yet name. The first wave came as shadows. twisting forms that moved with unnatural speed and precision. Cale's heart pounded as he drew closer to the walls, watching warriors and wolves leap into action. Rylan moved like a force of nature, silver hair glinting in the moonlight, commanding, lethal, and mesmerizing all at once. Cale felt both awe and fear, and a strange pull in his chest. The Alpha King was more than a leader. He was a storm unto himself. "Stay close to me," Rylan said, his voice a low rumble that carried authority. "Do not engage unless I allow it." Cale followed, heart racing. The shadows lunged, and the clash of steel and teeth filled the air. The wolves howled, their cries echoing over the fortress walls, a song of defiance and power. Cale watched, learning, observing, heart hammering. He was no longer a mere observer in this world. He was part of it, and he felt the rush of adrenaline that came with survival and courage. One shadow broke through the outer defenses and moved toward the walls where Cale stood. He froze, unsure what to do. The creature lunged, eyes glowing red, teeth bared. Instinct took over, and Cale reacted, grabbing a fallen staff and swinging it with all his strength. The creature recoiled, startled, giving him a moment to step back. Rylan appeared then, moving with fluid grace, and in a blur, the shadow was thrown back into the darkness. "Courage," Rylan said, voice calm but stern. "You acted. That is the beginning. Learn to trust it." Cale's chest heaved. For the first time he realized he could act, that he could face danger and survive. He had feared weakness all his life, and yet here, under Rylan's watchful gaze, he had found strength. The battle raged through the night. Cale moved with Rylan, dodging, observing, learning. Every encounter was a lesson in courage, every clash a test of his resolve. And through it all, Rylan remained beside him, a constant, commanding presence that Cale could not ignore. There was power in Rylan that went beyond strength. It was something deeper, something that demanded respect, loyalty, and something Cale could not name. By the time dawn approached, the shadows had been driven back, retreating into the forest with eerie howls that promised they would return. The fortress was battered but standing. Cale leaned against the wall, exhausted, his body trembling with fatigue and adrenaline. Rylan approached, silent, a shadow among shadows. "You survived," he said simply. "Many would have fallen. Many would have broken. You did not." Kyle swallowed, trying to catch his breath. I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted, voice low. Rylan's gaze softened, and for a moment Cale saw something rare, a hint of emotion behind the Alpha King's piercing eyes. "You faced your fears," he said. "You acted when it mattered. That is what separates the weak from the worthy." Cale looked down, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. He had never thought of himself as worthy. He had always been the rejected, the overlooked, the exile, and yet now, he had survived a battle that would have broken others. He had faced the darkness and lived. The aftermath was quiet, save for the distant cries of retreating shadows. Cale wandered the courtyard, surveying the damage. The fortress walls were scarred, trees twisted and broken, and the air still thrummed with residual energy. And yet, amidst the ruin, there was a strange beauty, a testament to resilience, courage, and the bond forged in the crucible of battle. Rylan joined him, standing close, and Cale felt the pull again. That magnetic, unspoken connection that seemed to bind them together. "You have learned much," Rylan said, "but this is only the beginning. The forest, the shadows, and the forces beyond, they will not rest, and neither can you." Cale nodded, understanding the weight of the words. He had grown, yes, but he was still in exile in many ways. His past, his fears, and his doubts would always be part of him. Yet he felt a strange determination. He would not falter. He would endure, and he would stand beside Rylan, no longer just an Omega, but something more. The Alpha King's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, and Cale felt a warmth that went beyond guidance or protection. It was acknowledgement, acceptance, and something unspoken that made his heart beat faster than he had ever known. As they walked through the fortress, Rylan's voice cut through the silence. "Kyle, there is more to learn. Strength is not only in battle. It is in understanding and patience in knowing when to act and when to wait. You will learn this whether you wish it or not." Cale nodded, absorbing the weight of the words. The journey had changed him. The storm, the forest, the shadows, they had all tested him, and he had survived. But the path ahead was still uncertain, and he felt the pull of the Alpha King, both a guide and a challenge he could not ignore. Night fell again, and the fortress was quiet. Cale stood on the balcony looking out at the valley below. The forest whispered in the wind, shadows curling like living things. He felt the weight of what had happened, the lessons learned, and the bond that had begun to form between him and Rylan. And then, in the stillness, the silver wolf howled. Not a call, but a promise. A reminder that danger was never far, that trials awaited, and that Cale's journey was far from over. Cale shivered, both from the cold and from anticipation. He did not yet understand the full depth of his connection to Rylan, nor the true challenges that lay ahead. But he knew one thing with certainty: he would not run. He would not falter. And he would follow, no matter how deep the shadows, no matter how dark the storm. The storm that had haunted the valley all season returned at last, winds ripping through the fortress, carrying with it the scent of the forest, of rain, and of approaching danger. Kyle stood on the highest tower, watching shadows swirl in the misty distance. The lessons of the cursed forest, the battles of the night before, and every challenge he had faced flashed in his mind. He was no longer the rejected Omega who had wandered blindly through the storm. He had grown, strengthened, and begun to understand a truth that he had never known. He belonged. Rylan appeared silently beside him, a shadow in silver moonlight, calm and commanding. "The time has come," he said, voice low but carrying the weight of certainty. "The darkness that seeks to claim this land. It will strike tonight. You will face it, Cale, as more than follower, more than Omega. You will face it as my equal, my companion." Cale swallowed, feeling the gravity of Rylan's words. The Alpha King's presence had always been powerful, even frightening. But now, standing together on the tower, he sensed something deeper, a bond forged in storms, battle, and shadows. A bond that went beyond fear, beyond trust, into something neither of them had dared name. I will stand," Cale said, voice trembling but steady. "I will not falter. Not tonight." Rylan's silver eyes softened for the briefest moment, and he placed a hand on Cale's shoulder. The touch was light, almost casual, yet it carried an unspoken weight, a promise, a challenge, and a connection that made Cale's heart beat faster than the thunder above. The first wave of shadows struck with the fury of a tempest. They surged through the valley like living darkness, twisted forms with eyes of fire and claws sharp as blades. Wolves and warriors leapt into action, Rylan leading the charge with a power that seemed almost supernatural. Cale followed, his senses sharpened, body moving in rhythm with the Alpha King. The battle was chaos, light clashing with shadow, steel and fang meeting in bursts of silver and black. Cale had never felt such adrenaline, such fear, or such clarity. Every strike, every movement, every decision mattered. He could feel the lessons of the cursed forest guiding him, the discipline, the courage, the understanding that power was as much in the mind as in the body. At one point, a shadow broke through the line and lunged toward Cale. Time seemed to slow. His instincts screamed, and he reacted with precision, deflecting the attack with the staff he had wielded through so many trials. But the shadow was relentless, stronger than any he had faced before. Rylan appeared beside him in an instant, silver hair like fire in the storm, eyes glowing. Together they moved as one, a seamless rhythm of strength and trust. Cale realized in that moment that the bond between them was not merely guidance, it was connection. Mutual, undeniable, and powerful. The shadows recoiled, but the storm above raged stronger, thunder rolling as if echoing the clash below. Cale's heart pounded, yet fear no longer ruled him. It was tempered with courage, with trust, and with something deeper, something that pulsed between him and Rylan. Quiet, yet unbreakable. Hours passed, though time felt strange in the storm. The battle raged, ebbing and flowing like the tides. Cale found himself side by side with Rylan more than once, their movements instinctively aligned. There was a rhythm in their cooperation, a silent understanding, and with every strike, Cale felt his confidence solidify. He was no longer just an exile following a silver wolf's call. He was part of something greater, and the Alpha King's power was not just protection, but shared strength. Then came the heart of the storm. A shadow unlike any other rose from the valley, immense and terrifying, its form shifting and twisting, eyes burning with a cruel intelligence. It moved toward the fortress with deliberate purpose, as if it had come to claim not just the land, but the bond between Cale and Rylan. Rylan turned to Cale, expression intense. "This is it," he said. "The final test. We face it together. Remember everything you have learned and trust me. And yourself." Cal nodded, chest tight, fear and anticipation warring inside him. "Together," he said. The clash was cataclysmic. Lightning split the sky, rain lashed against stone, and the shadow's roar shook the very foundations of the fortress. Cale fought beside Rylan, their movements synchronized in ways Cale had never imagined possible. Every strike was a statement of courage, every block a testament to survival. Every glance shared a quiet acknowledgement of their bond. At a critical moment, Cale was thrown off balance, the shadow's claws grazing him. Pain lanced through his arm, but he steadied himself, remembering Rylan's lessons. Fear could be a weapon if harnessed. Summoning every ounce of courage, Cale countered with a precision strike, and the shadow recoiled. Momentarily stunned, Rylan seized the opportunity, his presence radiating power and authority, a force of silver and light. Together they pressed the attack, relentless and unyielding. The shadow's form began to waver, losing cohesion under the combined strength of Alpha and Omega. Master and companion, Cale felt a surge of exhilaration, exhaustion, and something more, a bond deeper than fear or survival. He realized that this moment, this shared struggle, was the culmination of every step he had taken since the storm had first cast him into exile. He was no longer rejected. He was not weak. He was part of something enduring, powerful, and eternal. With one final synchronized strike, Rylan and Cale struck the heart of the shadow. A burst of silver light erupted, and the darkness shattered, dissolving into mist and echoes. The storm above seemed to pause, the wind holding its breath, and then slowly the clouds parted, revealing the first light of dawn breaking across the valley. Cale sank to his knees, exhausted, dripping with rain and sweat. Rylan was beside him, silent, steady, a hand resting lightly on Cale's shoulder. Neither spoke for a long moment, just breathing, listening to the calm that followed the storm. Finally, Cale lifted his eyes to Rylan. "We did it," he whispered, disbelief and awe mingling in his voice. Rylan's silver eyes softened, and for the first time, Cale saw not the commanding Alpha King, but the man behind the legend, strong, proud and yet capable of connection, trust, and something far deeper. "Yes," Rylan said. "Together we did, and you have proven yourself, Kyle, not only to me but to yourself." Kyle felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of belonging that he had never known. The pain of rejection, the loneliness of exile, and the fear of weakness, all of it had been washed away in the storm, the trials, and the battle. He was no longer an outsider. He was part of something eternal, bound not just by circumstance but by respect, courage, and an unspoken connection he could no longer deny. The sun rose fully, painting the valley in gold and silver. The fortress stood tall, scars from the battle visible but beautiful in their resilience. Wolves prowled the walls, warriors tended to repairs, and the forest beyond seemed to breathe a quiet sigh of relief. Cale looked at Rylan, and in that gaze, he saw something undeniable, a promise, a bond, a recognition of all they had endured together. "Rylan," he began, unsure of words that could capture what he felt. Rylan's gaze held him, steady and unflinching. "You have grown beyond what I expected," he said, voice soft but commanding. "You are no longer just an Omega following a call. You are my equal, my companion, and something I cannot ignore." Cale's heart pounded, and for a moment silence stretched between them, heavy with meaning. The bond forged in storms, battles, and shadows had transformed into something enduring, something neither could deny. The silver wolf howled one last time from the valley below, and Cale felt it in his chest, a reminder of the journey, the trials, and the connection that had brought him from rejection to belonging. Rylan extended his hand, not as a king to a follower, but as one being to another. Cale took it, feeling the electricity of trust, courage, and bond pass between them. In that simple touch, Cale realized that he was home, not in a place, but with a presence, a connection that would endure through storms, darkness, and whatever else the future held. The valley was quiet now, the shadows gone, the storm past. Cale and Rylan stood together, Alpha and Omega, partners forged in trials and trust, ready to face the world as one. And in that moment, Cale knew that rejection had been only the beginning, exile only a path, and the howl of the silver wolf had been a call to something greater than he had ever imagined. Together, they would rise stronger than any darkness, bound by courage, trust, and a bond forged in storms and shadows.